My name was Dorothy Reynolds, and I was 72 years old. Most people in Aspen, Colorado knew me as Miss Dot, the retired woman who used to run the town's weekend storytelling circle at the public library. I never became famous, never chased something loud, but I had a voice that could calm restless children and adults who quietly carried wounds. My work at the library wasn't about paychecks. It was about moments. Moments where people felt seen. I organized reading programs for children who couldn't afford books, hosted winter storytelling nights by the fireplace, and even ran a grief-healing narrative corner for seniors. When my husband, Henry, passed away 9 years ago, the library had become my second heartbeat. Every shelf felt like company. Every story felt like proof that pain could be survived, and I believed with every bone in my body that stories saved lives, especially when life tried convincing you it was done with you. Aspen was more than snow-painted rooftops and postcard landscapes. It was a place where quiet carried meaning, where winter nights lasted long enough to hear your own thoughts, and where community mattered more than perfection. My small wooden house sat near the edge of town. Blue window frames, a flower pot that never grew much, a porch swing that creaked like an old lullaby, and a brass wind chime that sang every time the mountain breeze passed through. My days followed a gentle rhythm: hot coffee at dawn, a long stare out the window watching the pine trees sway, knitting scarves I never finished. Sometimes I'd walk to the market, earning the occasional "Hi, Miss Dot," shouted from passing cars. It was a slow life, a predictable life, a safe life, the kind you believe nothing bad can touch, simply because you've already lived through enough storms. Widowhood hadn't broken me, but it had remodeled me. The nights were the hardest, when the world muted itself and memories got too loud. But I carried Henry's laugh inside me, tucked safely next to my ribs. He used to say, "Dot, heartache isn't a period." It's a comma. I tried to live like that was true. My children helped. They were my living proof that Henry and I created something right in a world that often goes wrong. I wasn't wealthy. I wasn't seeking new beginnings or grand adventures. All I wanted was to watch my children thrive, quietly finish the chapters I was meant to complete, and maybe, if life allowed, leave behind stories that someone would remember with a small smile. My children were the pride of my quiet universe. Austin, my firstborn, was 38. Tall, sharp-featured, confident without trying too hard. He carried the kind of energy that filled rooms. He grew up believing the world was a ladder, and he was meant to climb it fast. He inherited his father's thinking mind and my stubborn heart. He was loud when passionate, silent when calculating, and could charm doubt out of anyone when he truly wanted to. Teachers once told me he'd run something big someday. Now he worked in tech and talked about investments, apps, markets, and possibilities that sounded like monologues from another planet. When he spoke, it often felt like watching fireworks: bright, fast, impressive, but gone before you learned their shape. Then there was Naomi, 36. Softer edges, slower voice, deeper thinker. If Austin was fire, Naomi was earth. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words carried weight. She chose social work over corporate ladders. She worked with troubled teens, guided families drowning in chaos, and believed every human deserved grace before judgment. She reminded me of Henry more than she knew. Compassion wasn't something she practiced. It was wired into her spine. Where Austin chased futures, Naomi healed pasts. Where he spoke loudly, she listened loudly. She always sat a little closer to me than necessary, like her presence was an unspoken promise. "I see you, Mom." I raised them both with stories instead of sermons. Our kitchen table used to host poetry, debates, laughter that bordered on tears, and disagreements that ended in midnight pancakes. There was a time when Austin protected his sister like a shield, and Naomi believed her brother's voice louder than her own reason. They loved fiercely, or at least, that's what I believed. As they grew, the world reshaped them differently, Distance introduced opinions. Success introduced ego. Struggles introduced secrets. Family dinners got quieter over the years, not because we fought, but because we stopped knowing what to ask. But they were my children, and mothers, no matter how old, hold on to a version of their kids that time no longer recognizes. Losing Henry changed the color of everything. Even joy looked slightly muted, like a photograph that faded but refused to disappear. He had been the laughter in tense rooms, the rational voice in emotional storms, the glue when life shook us. After the funeral, the house echoed. His chair felt accusatorily empty. Coffee smelled the same, but never tasted right again. Nights stretched too long. Mornings arrived too indifferent. I survived not because I was strong, but because there was no polite way to collapse permanently. Grief, I learned, doesn't ask permission. It just rearranges the furniture inside you and hopes you learn to walk around the new layout without bruising too often. My children checked in, of course. Austin called every few days, efficient, clipped, scheduled between meetings. "You okay, Mum?" he'd ask, already multitasking somewhere else. Naomi visited every weekend, bringing soups I never finished and hugs that didn't need words. She'd sit beside me on the porch, letting silence do the talking while snowflakes landed in our hair like gentle punctuation marks to conversations we weren't having aloud. Slowly, the world resumed motion, even if I wasn't sure I wanted it to. I returned to the library, not to lead stories, but to borrow them. Fiction was gentler than reality most days. I convinced myself this was enough. A quieter life didn't mean a smaller life. It meant a life with fewer wounds left to collect. My children becoming adults was both beautiful and painful, like watching a garden you built grow beyond the fence you planted it in. They no longer needed me in the ways they once did, but I still needed them in the ways a mother silently carries forever. Everything felt stable, not perfect, not dazzling, but intact. And when life is calm for too long, you sometimes forget that calm is not a promise. It's only a pause. Austin came to see me on a Thursday evening. The snow had just started falling again, thick and dreamy, turning the world softer around the edges. He knocked, even though he still had a key. That detail should have told me something. He stood at the door in a charcoal coat, hair dusted with snow, expression rehearsed somewhere between hopeful and anxious. I remember the exact smell: cold winter air and mint gum. His shoes squeaked slightly against the wooden floor, a sound that clung to the moment longer than it should have. We sat at the dining table where countless birthday cakes had once lived. He didn't touch the tea I poured. His fingers tapped a folder, light grey, thin, harmless looking, the kind of folder that could ruin a life if opened wrong, though I didn't know that yet. "Mum," he began, leaning forward with the practiced sincerity of someone who had already memorized how believable he needed to sound. He explained he was finally launching something big, an expansion, an opportunity too good to miss. Investors needed a guarantor, he said. Temporary, routine, a formality, just a signature to unlock momentum. Nothing risky, nothing complicated. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," he added, guilt applied with precision. I watched my son explain numbers like he was translating stardust. His tone was confident, sprinkled with hurry. He didn't want me thinking. He wanted me trusting. He slid the folder toward me, not rushed, but not slow either. Strategically paced pressure. "You sign here, Mum." That's it. It changes everything for me. A mother doesn't hear logic first. She hears legacy. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't open the attachment of fear. I saw his ambition, not the fine print. And ambition in children is a language mothers have trouble translating into danger. The words Austin used were gentle but engineered. "Mum, this is my one big shot. A signature from you tells them I have backing, that I come from stability." His eyes softened just enough to feel genuine. It's frightening how love blurs instincts sharper than knives. He spoke about timelines, approvals, credits, growth. Every sentence was layered in promise, and beneath every promise lived an unspoken fear. The fear that I might say no. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Control doesn't always sound loud. The room felt warm, but a draft hovered around the truth. I felt it. Small, sharp, uninvited. A mother learns to identify threats by temperature, not evidence. Yet I talked myself out of suspicion. This is my son. This is blood. This is family. Doubt felt like betrayal, and betrayal was a language I refused to speak. You know I've always handled my world, Mom. I just need you on paper. That's all. You'll be proud later. I imagined him succeeding. I imagined telling people at the market that my son built something bigger than himself. I imagined legacy, pride, generational shift. And that fantasy was warmer than caution. So I convinced myself hesitation was small-minded. Love felt braver than fear. I signed. My pen moved smoothly, obediently, reverently, like a witness at a wedding I didn't realize was a warning. He exhaled after the final stroke, shoulders loosening just a fraction, relief slipping out before gratitude entered. "Thank you, Mum," he said. No extra words, no celebratory spark, just efficiency clothed in affection. The wind outside hummed against the walls, unaware it was humming the beginning of a storm no forecast predicted. And I, still believing I had just lifted my child, had no idea I had quietly opened a door that would uproot everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. The first crack didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like silence. 3 days after Austin left with the signed papers, the phone calls changed texture. Before, he called with confident updates, small laughs, fast plans. Now every call felt shorter, thinner, like someone cutting sentences in half before they reached meaning. I'd ask, "How's everything going?" And he'd reply, "Moving." If I asked, "Need anything else from me?" He'd answer, "All good." It was the emotional equivalent of a door being gently shut instead of slammed. No explosion, no drama, just incremental distance. And distance, I've learned, can bruise deeper than shouting. That same week, Naomi arrived unannounced, boots dusty from the road, cheeks pink from winter's bite. She didn't start with greetings. She started with a truth wrapped in breathless urgency. "What exactly did you sign, Mum?" Her voice trembled, not with anger but fear. The kind that recognizes danger longer than hope can. I told her what I knew: an expansion, guarantor papers, temporary support. I even repeated Austin's words as if lending credibility to borrowed reassurance. Naomi rubbed her forehead, pacing a slow circle in my living room like she was tracing invisible answers in the air. "He hasn't been sleeping, Mum. He's been lying to people. His credit is complicated." The word complicated landed like shattered glass. Not loud, not dramatic, sharp, silent, and slicing without immediate pain. She didn't yell. Naomi almost never yells. She whisper-punched the truth instead. "I tried to warn you without sounding like I was attacking him. But something is very wrong." She sat beside me, knees pointing toward mine, the posture of a person who isn't leaving until something is understood. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, not the cold outside, the cold of realization forming shape. That night, I opened the folder's copy Austin left behind. I read every page slowly, not because it was complex, but because every sentence felt heavier than the last. Words like liability, collateral, binding authority, debt transfer, guarantor responsibility, legal obligation, asset attachment. The letters didn't blur. My vision did. I saw signatures, my signature, my neat, trusting handwriting at the bottom of pages that no longer felt like documents, but warnings delivered too late. My heart thudded in my throat. A frantic Morse code my body suddenly understood. Naomi sat quietly beside me. No lectures, no anger. Just the steady presence of a daughter watching a mother meet reality head on. When I finally whispered, "Oh no," the universe didn't answer back with comfort, only consequence. The emotional collision didn't happen in a courtroom or lawyer's office. It happened at a Friday family brunch, the kind we used to share during softer years, when eggs and laughter mixed easier than silence and suspicion. We met at a small diner downtown, the kind that smells like maple syrup and old vinyl seats, where strangers didn't expect families to fracture publicly. Outside, snow fell like cotton drifting from an unpicked seam. Inside, tension hung heavier than winter coats drying by a radiator. Austin arrived last. He slid into the booth without eye contact, shrugging his jacket off like someone unloading evidence instead of outerwear. Naomi sat stiff-backed, stirring coffee she wasn't drinking. I was between them, physically and emotionally, an exhausted referee in a game no one admitted was being played. The waitress set plates down like peace offerings: pancakes, eggs, bacon, syrup, dripping in golden honesty none of us could mirror. Small talk attempted to rise, but collapsed under the gravity of everything unsaid. Then Naomi broke open the silence, not with accusation, but exposure. "Austin, what exactly did Mom sign for you?" Fawkes froze mid-air. His jaw shifted, just once, barely noticeable, like a man deciding which version of himself to release. "Help, Claire." He still accidentally used her childhood nickname when cornered. "Nothing she can't handle." The table winced collectively, like the words were heavy enough to bend metal. Naomi leaned forward, slow, precise, surgical. "You realize we're talking about her house, her identity, her safety, right?" The air changed pressure. The diner noise dimmed around us. Austin exhaled through his nose, irritation dressed as confidence. "You're being dramatic," Naomi shot back, "and you're minimizing consequences you don't intend to face." Their sentences fired back and forth, faster, sharper, each one carving territory in a war neither of them planned to fight publicly. I sat there, slowly shrinking inside my own coat, mother, referee, witness, collateral. Finally, I whispered, not loud enough to interrupt, but loud enough to end it. "I signed because I trusted you." The table snapped still. A snowplow outside scraped pavement like a growl. Austin avoided my eyes. Naomi closed hers briefly as if absorbing a personal wound. That moment didn't explode outward. It exploded inward, quietly, like a wall cracking behind wallpaper. No one stormed out. No one yelled. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it eats calmly across the table from you. After brunch, a week passed in the type of silence that doesn't heal. It interrogates. The house felt larger than before. Every room echoed with unanswered questions. I began rehearsing conversations I'd never speak aloud. My porch swing creaked under the weight of thoughts heavier than any winter layer. Each morning, I'd look at the mailbox like it contained a verdict instead of paper. And eventually, of course, it did. The envelope was legal-sized, beige, unremarkable, and impossibly cruel in its neutrality. Legal notices don't arrive with dramatic music. They arrive looking like ordinary mail, as if politeness could soften the blow. My name sat printed with bureaucratic confidence above words that confirmed what my stomach already knew. Notice of liability. Assigned debt. Immediate review required. That sterile vocabulary meant something far more human and devastating. It meant the debt belonged to me now. It meant responsibility. It meant exposure. It meant a future rerouted without my consent. I unfolded each page slowly, not because I didn't understand fast, but because absorbing truth too quickly can make the heart recoil. Debt amount $190,000. The figure glared back like a verdict delivered in numbers. I felt my pulse trip, stumble, renegotiate its pace. My mouth went dry. My hands were steady. Pain doesn't always shake. Sometimes it organizes itself into stillness. The worst part wasn't the number. It was the realization that signatures are more powerful than promises. I had signed in faith and inherited fallout in paperwork. The legal language didn't care about love, intention, motherhood, trust, or hope. Courts honor ink more than emotion. Contracts respect signatures more than sacrifices. I called Austin before panic could fully form. The phone rang longer than usual. When he finally answered, his voice wasn't guilty. It was inconvenienced. "Mom? This again?" My chest cracked open silently. I managed, "It's in my name, Austin." All of it, a pause. Too measured to be accidental. "We're handling it. Relax, relax." The word ricocheted inside me. A lullaby for denial, a muzzle for accountability. The call ended not with resolution, but redirection, and for the first time I felt, not maternal worry, but the cold outline of self-preservation forming in the darkness. Denial has a shelf life. Mine expired the moment Austin stopped answering calls altogether, not just postponing conversations, erasing access, straight to voicemail every time, texts delivered, never read. That digital quiet felt louder than shouting. Absence was the confession. Silence was the signature he refused to write. Naomi, on the other hand, drove to me the moment she sensed collapse. She didn't ask if I needed her. She showed up because she already knew I did. I remember opening the door before she knocked. Snowflakes had caught in her hair, melting into tiny silver beads under the porch light. She didn't say a word. She stepped inside, wrapped her arms around me, and held on like someone anchoring a person during an invisible storm. I didn't cry immediately. I spoke first, carefully, like placing breakable glass on a table. "He knew, didn't he?" Naomi didn't soften the answer. "Yes." That single syllable hit harder than any raised voice. Tears didn't arrive dramatically. They arrived in sequence. Slow, unstoppable, unceremonious. Grief has many faces, but betrayal has a temperature. This one was frostbitten. We sat on the couch, small, silent, mother and daughter braided into the same heartbreak. I replayed every sign I ignored like video evidence in a courtroom of memory. The tone shifts, the clipped calls, the rehearsed urgency, the scripted hope, the weaponized trust, the just sign, Mom. I had mistaken confidence for clarity and urgency for truth. Hope had been the disguise, desperation the engine, my signature the solution. Naomi squeezed my hand, grounding me before despair could recruit me permanently. "We fix it now," she said. Not "I told you so." Not "how could you." Not "what were you thinking." Just action, forward motion, repair. Love without audience. For the first time in weeks, my breathing found a rhythm that didn't feel borrowed. I was hurt, but no longer alone. The truth unraveled in layers thicker than winter coats. Through financial records, short meetings with professionals, and the absence of comforting lies, we discovered the real story, one that didn't resemble the one Austin gifted me like optimism. There was no startup expansion, no investors, no upcoming breakthrough, no equipment upgrades, no momentum waiting to be unlocked. The signatures weren't scaffolding for success. They were scaffolding for escape. The money hadn't funded ideas. It had buried problems, gambling losses, luxury purchases that never left receipts licking their footprints, cars briefly owned, trips briefly enjoyed, debts quietly growing like mold behind wallpaper. The kind of choices a person buries, hoping no one ever inspects the foundation. The most painful realization wasn't that he struggled. It was that he deliberately recruited me to absorb the consequences of those struggles, not by accident, not by miscommunication, by strategy. He didn't ask for help. He asked for transfer of risk. Understanding arrived without permission. Clarity doesn't always comfort. Sometimes it wounds with accuracy. Naomi sat beside me during each discovery, sharper than grief, steadier than disappointment. Professionals explained options, liabilities, timelines, exposure. Their language was clinical, detached from the emotional carnage it narrated. But I heard the core translation beneath their terms. You were targeted, not trusted. For the first time, my grief split in two directions, one for the child I raised, and one for the man he decided to become when the world required accountability. Love was still present, but love had stopped being blind. And in that painful, unwelcome awakening, I realized something irreversible. Motherhood explains many wounds, but it is not obligated to forgive every weapon forged in its name. The morning the truth fell apart is one I still feel in my bones. I remember the exact sound the envelope made when it hit the kitchen table. Dry, heavy, unforgiving. The letterhead stared back at me. State Financial Recovery Division. My name followed beneath it, bold and immovable like a verdict already passed. My hands shook before I even opened it. Naomi stood across from me, silent, already sensing the collapse before it happened. Inside was a detailed breakdown of transactions, lines of payments I had never made, transfers to casinos, hotel reservations, a luxury car rental in Las Vegas, payments to high-interest lenders. The words blurred, but the total didn't. $190,000 in outstanding debt, legally tied to me. My knees buckled, and I sat, not gracefully, not emotionally, but like someone whose joints simply gave up. Naomi didn't ask questions. She didn't gasp dramatically. She came over, wrapped both her arms around my shoulders, and just let me fall into the quiet. I thought it was for equipment, I whispered. Barely air. I know, she said. No judgment, no lecture, just grief for me. The memories hit like flashbacks in a courtroom montage. Austin, sitting on this very couch, rehearsed sincerity in his voice, the confident tone, the strategically timed sighs, the "I've got this, Mom." The carefully placed excitement in his eyes the way you'd decorate a stage set. And me, applauding the act without noticing the wires. When Naomi gently slid the transaction list closer, my heart sank lower. Not just because of the money, but because of the method. These weren't business expenses. These were excesses. The kind of splurges someone makes when they think consequences live far away. Casino withdrawals at 2 a.m., suites booked for only one night, expensive dinners, bottles worth more than my mortgage payment, impulse purchases dressed up as rewards. None of it carried desperation. It carried entitlement. I felt the familiar sting of self-betrayal. The worst wound isn't when someone else hurts you. It's when you realize you handed them the knife. Was I foolish? Yes. Naive? Painfully. But I was also a mother reduced to ink on a contract, a signature treated like collateral. Naomi knelt beside me. Mum, we handle this now, not tomorrow, not gently. We do it right. What if we lose? We already lose if we do nothing. The room felt oddly still. The wind outside moved, but not the air around me. I realized my grief had shifted shape. It was no longer heartbreak alone. It was activation energy, the kind of anger that cleans the lenses after tears blur them. The seed of a decision formed in my chest. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration, my identity back, my name unshackled, my life no longer an account on someone else's ledger. That was the moment the mother stopped gasping, and the woman stood. Taking legal action against your own child feels like walking into winter barefoot. Every step burns, not from cold, but from the awareness that blood should have protected you, not litigated against you. I sat in the attorney's office 2 days later, clutching Naomi's hand like a life preserver. The law books towered behind the attorney like silent judges. Her name was Marissa Cole, sharp eyes, softer voice. "So," she said gently, "we file under identity misuse and financial exploitation?" Family relation doesn't change the classification. The words felt clinical, almost too neat for a wound this personal. Identity misuse. Financial exploitation. They sounded like corporate terms, not something that could walk into your childhood hallway wearing your son's face. "What will happen to him?" I asked. "The law doesn't aim to destroy him," she said carefully, "but it will expose the truth. Consequences follow facts, not emotions." I nodded, though no part of me felt composed. My stomach carried a storm. My heart wanted to veto the whole idea, but my spirit, older, wiser, no longer edited by guilt, knew better. That afternoon, I signed again, not blindly this time, not lovingly, not hopefully. This time, defensively. Each letter of my name felt like a reclaiming, like stitching a tear closed with intention. The first court notice left the same house that once mailed birthday cards. The irony stung. I didn't sleep that night. The ceiling felt like a witness. I kept replaying scenes. Austin as a toddler holding my finger to walk. Austin on graduation day. Austin laughing in the backyard. None of the memories prepared me for Austin as a defendant. News spread quietly at first, then loudly. Courts have announcements. Small towns have microphones. The whispers looped through Aspen like cold wind through empty corridors. She sued her own son. The shame didn't hurt as much as the tone of surprise, as if betrayal inside family is rarer than betrayal outside it. Naomi fielded phone calls like a shield. "We're protecting her," she told anyone who needed permission to understand. "Not defending my decision. Defining it." The hearings took weeks, statements collected, bank trails mapped, digital footprints printed in black and white. Every piece of evidence was a stone dropped into the well of denial until the water finally rippled with undeniable truth. Austin never showed up the first 3 summons. His absence was louder than any argument he could have made. By the 4th filing, the judge granted a freeze on liability tied to my name. The room exhaled. Not in celebration, but in procedural closure. The first legal wall between me and the debt was now standing. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a boundary. And at 72, building boundaries feels like building cathedrals. Late, monumental, necessary. The court didn't just freeze a debt. It cracked open the stage where my family story had been performing instead of living. There is a difference between being known and being seen, and that courtroom finally forced the spotlight to reveal, not flatter. When Austin was legally served, the reaction came exactly as you'd expect from someone whose carefully arranged collapsing had finally made noise. Anger first, shock second, blame third. Accountability nowhere in the lineup. "You could have talked to me," he shouted over the phone, the one phone call he finally answered. "I tried," I said quietly. "No, you went nuclear." "No," I corrected, voice steady. "You lit the fuse. I just stopped sitting on top of it." Silence. Heavy, thick, stunned. "How could you do this to me, Mom?" The answer rose in my throat, unfiltered by guilt for the first time. "How could you put me in a position where I had to?" That was the end of the call. No goodbye, no resolution. Just a door that finally clicked closed after years of never latching. The legal proceedings spilled our private disaster into public record. People saw fraud next to my son's name and made assumptions like grocery lists. Some pitied me. Some pitied him. A few pitied the situation as a whole. The only people with clarity were the ones who listened without choosing sides. Naomi stayed, steady, unshaken. She never dramatized her loyalty. She just wore it daily like a quiet uniform. She cooked dinner when I forgot to eat. She reminded me to hydrate like grief was dehydration. One night, while snow pressed softly against the windows, she asked, "Do you regret filing?" I thought about it. Long, carefully, honestly. Then shook my head. I regret the reason. Not the remedy. We weren't villains in opposite stories. We were casualties of a collision between love and consequence. I was mourning a son who existed before the decisions. He was angry at a mother who stopped making herself smaller to preserve peace. Both truths lived simultaneously, uncomfortable and valid. The biggest emotional revelation didn't happen in court. It happened in the mirror weeks later when I realized I no longer flinched at my own reflection. I didn't look like a woman who had destroyed her family. I looked like a woman who had finally refused to be destroyed by it. Sometimes survival is misinterpreted as coldness, until someone else needs the same courage you once activated. The apology arrived in late spring, long after winter had thawed, but long before the emotional ground softened. A letter. No knock on the door. No trembling voice. No eye contact to measure sincerity. Just paper. Folded, delayed, careful. "Mom," it read. "I never meant for things to go this far. I made mistakes. I was in over my head. I'm sorry if you got hurt. If." That word hung like smoke in a cathedral. The letter continued with explanations that sounded more like escape routes than remorse. Regret phrased as inconvenience. Accountability diluted into circumstance. Naomi read it too, silently, eyebrows gently raised in that way that didn't judge him but quietly validated me. "What do you want to do with it?" she asked. I folded it back, deliberately, without anger. "File it." It deserved a place in the archive of what happened, not the altar of forgiveness. Apologies don't expire, but their relevance shifts depending on timing and truth. He wasn't asking for reconciliation. He was asking for emotional immunity. That wasn't mine to grant. I didn't hate him. That surprised even me. Hate takes energy, and grief had already overdrawn my account. What I felt was acceptance, the mature cousin of closure. It doesn't rewrite the story. It just stops fighting the facts. I wrote back, one page only. "I love the child you were. I grieve the choices you made, and I hope someday you understand the cost beyond money. I wish you healing, but I cannot rebuild trust on unfinished truth." I mailed it with steady hands. No trembling. No tears. Not because it didn't hurt, but because hurt no longer dictated my handwriting. Weeks passed. No reply came. The silence, for once, felt appropriate. Not painful. Not pointed. Just earned. Friends later asked if mothers are allowed to step back. My answer became simple. Love is not a subscription that cancels my right to safety. The story didn't end in fireworks or reconciliation. It ended in restoration. My legal name cleared. My house untouched. My savings protected. My dignity rebuilt, plank by plank. Not dramatically, but permanently. Austin moved away from Aspen. I heard updates occasionally, filtered through neutral voices who informed but didn't editorialize. He was working again, paying debts, trying maybe to rebuild something he once burned for warmth. I hoped it was true, not for my ending, but for his beginning. Naomi never asked for credit. Loyalty never begs to be acknowledged. It just shows up without needing applause. I told her once, "You saved more than this house." She smiled. "No, Mom. You saved yourself." I just sat in the passenger seat. At 72, Reinvention feels less like change and more like uncovering something that was always there, but buried under other roles: mother, wife, peacekeeper, shield. When those titles finally stepped aside, the woman underneath remembered she was allowed to exist too. I returned to the library, not as someone who needed distraction, but as someone who had earned a voice again. I started a weekly reading hour for seniors called Second Chapters. No metaphors too grand, just honest stories about surviving the pages we never planned to write. People often think family betrayal ruins you beyond repair. It doesn't. It ruins the illusion, not the human. The illusion breaks cleaner, the human bleeds longer, but heals wiser. The greatest lesson didn't arrive with a moral flourish. It arrived quietly, like dawn refusing to negotiate with night. Love fiercely, but never sign your safety away. Blood builds bonds, not blind contracts. To anyone listening to my story, whether you're 22 or 82, remember this: your kindness is a strength, not a currency. Spend it generously, but never bank your future on promises that avoid paperwork or truth. Some stories teach us how to love. Mine taught me how to survive love when it stops being safe. If my story moved you, stay a moment longer. Like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. Someone out there needs to know they're allowed to stand up for themselves, even in the hardest family chapters.